And welcome to my Taster Talk. My name is Dr. Geraldine Horan and I teach and research German linguistics in the School of European Languages, Cultures and Society, otherwise known as SELCS, here at UCL. In my talk, I'm going to look at borrowing and in particular how and why modern German borrows from English. This talk is intended to give you some idea of the kind of topics that we would look at in my Introduction to German Linguistics seminar, which is available to first and second years at undergraduate level. And it doesn't presuppose any knowledge of linguistics, but of course any knowledge that you have is very welcome. So here's my first question. Can you think of any English words that are used in German? Here are my examples: Computer, Handy, Sorry, Cool, and Liken. I think they're fairly self-explanatory, really. Obviously, computer, sorry, cool will be well known. But even handy, even though it doesn't exist in English in the same form, I think is well known to many people now as meaning mobile phone. And liken is taken from English to like, as in to like something on social media. So all of them recognizable. Now, the process of borrowing from one language into another is known as lexical borrowing, and the words that are then borrowed are known as loan words. Interestingly, with loan words you have a donor language, in this case it's English, a recipient language, in this case German, but loan words are not really on loan. That is, once they're borrowed into a language, they're not really given back. Here's my next question. Can you explain what the following words mean in English? Beamer, happy end, and spot. So they appear to be English words, they have an English form, but do they mean in English what you think they mean? Beamer in German refers to a projector. Ein happy end is a happy ending in a film or a novel, and a spot is an advertisement. So how did you do? Did you come up with the same answers? So what happens when words are borrowed from English into German? They have to be integrated into the language system, into its grammar. So here's my next question. What happens to nouns and verbs that are borrowed from English into German? Well, nouns have to be assigned a gender, as you know. German has 3 genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter. Let's look at our examples. What gender would you say is assigned to Beamer, meaning projector? Or how about story? Well, here's the answer. Der Beamer, masculine, and die Story, feminine. Why is that? Well, with der Beamer, we can say that nouns ending in ER and OR are masculine. And with Story, it's feminine because its nearest equivalent in German, which is die Geschichte, is feminine. These are the kinds of factors that influence the gender of an English loanword or Anglicism. If you've ever been told that all Anglicisms are automatically neuter, then you can see that this is certainly not the case. If we look at verbs, what happens to the verb to recycle in German? Well, in its infinitive form, it's recyceln, and then it's conjugated just as any other verb. Ich habe die Flaschen recycelt can be spelt in 2 different ways. I have recycled, or I recycled the bottles. So as you can see, it fits into the German system, grammar system, just the same as any other words. There are different types of loanwords. Some loanwords, such as story, have been transferred fairly straightforwardly from English into German without much modification. But there are other categories as well. And here are some examples, and I'd like you to think about the ways in which they differ from the ones we've looked at previously. So the examples are Wolkenkratzer, Milchshake, und eine gute Zeit haben. Okay, so here are my explanations. Wolkenkratzer is a loan rendition. The word is translated from the English skyscraper, and that gives us Wolkenkratzer. But if we translate it back into English, we can see that it actually means cloud scraper. And that's why we call it a loan rendition, because it's not a straightforward translation. The next example is milkshake. Milkshake. As you can see, this is a partial loan translation, and that's because the first component of the word, milk, has been translated into German, but the second component has been left untranslated. And finally, we have eine gute Zeit haben. It's a loan phrase that has been translated from the English to have a good time. So these are just some examples of further categories of loan word in German. And what about these examples? Handy, public viewing and Polunder. Handy, as we've discussed before, means mobile phone. Public viewing, we can probably guess what it means. It means something that's viewed in public, but in German it has a very specific meaning, and that is the outdoor screening of an event, usually a football match or other sporting event. And Polunder, well, it's linked to pullover in English, except a Polunder in German is a sleeveless tank top. Now, these examples are often referred to as pseudo-loans or pseudo-anglicisms, and this is because it's a word that has an English form, it looks English, but either doesn't exist in the English language or is used in a different context or with a different meaning than the one in German. How many anglicisms do you think there are in the German language? Well, in terms of percentage, estimates vary at between 3 and 5% of the total German vocabulary, so not really very much. So if that is the case, why is it that some people object to loanwords or see them as a threat to the German language? Now, before we look at specific explanations, I think it's important to link this fear to a wider phenomenon known as linguistic purism. And this is a phenomenon whereby speakers perceive of the language, any language, as an entity that is pure and can be harmed or damaged by external influence. It's sort of like a peach, a fruit, a peach maybe, let's stick with peach, that can be bruised or damaged, or it can decay, and as speakers our responsibility is to keep it intact. Now, of course, as linguists, we know that this is not the case, that this may be an emotional response to language, but it's not how language works. Language is a tool for communication and interaction. But some people do feel very strongly about language, and their objections are, well, fear of language change. So the older we become, the more conservative we become, the more we dislike language change, the more we interpret language innovation as something negative. And this is linked to a sort of wider dislike of societal change. Another reason is the fear of lack of comprehension. So this idea that when new words come into the language, that they may not be comprehensible and they may lead to misunderstandings, and that on a wider scale or at its most extreme level, that this may lead to social division between younger speakers and older speakers, for example. And then we also have the fear of loss of cultural power and influence, and this is the link between national identity, national pride and a national language, whereby if a language has to borrow from another language, that this is interpreted as a sign of weakness or a sign of loss of cultural power and influence. Again, as linguists, we can say that this is not the case, but this is often a perception. And then we have the fear of language loss, again an emotional response to influences from other languages, this idea that one language will replace another, even though, as we can see in German, this is clearly not the case. So to sum up, I think it's important from a linguistic perspective to remember the following: that language change is inevitable, and this includes borrowing and influence from other languages. Languages have for centuries borrowed from each other for social, cultural, political and geographical reasons. This has been the case and will continue to be the case. that loan words, Anglicisms in German, are there for a reason. They're not anything to do with laziness or showing off, maybe a little bit of showing off, but certainly not laziness. They are there to enrich the language. They offer more succinctness, nuance, diversity of expression. And it's important to remember that German is a vibrant language. It's in no danger of disappearing or indeed being replaced by English. I hope you've enjoyed this very brief introduction to linguistics and the topic of lexical borrowing and Anglicisms in German. If you have any questions about this or other linguistic topics in German, please feel free to get in touch. My email address is on the bottom of the slide. In the meantime, thank you for watching and listening. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Auf Wiedersehen und Tschüss.